Good afternoon and welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us at MarketSite in Times Square, we have Camille Asaro and Kelly Rao. They are both audit partners with KPMG, and we are going to look at the Women in Alternative Investments Report, the 6th edition, and some of the key findings. Thank you both for joining us at MarketSite today. And I want to kick it off with you, Kelly. What is the Women in Alternative Investment Survey? Tell us about the methodology behind it.
Sure. So this is, as you mentioned, the 6th time we've done this survey. The first time was done in 2011. And this year we had 886 respondents globally. Over the years, it has changed from being, it's always covered women in hedge funds and private equity and venture capital. We included real estate a couple of years ago and also took it to an international audience. It's always a conversation with senior leaders about what's going on in the business, as well as how gender is impacting how they do their job.
Well, it's really interesting because that's a very robust sample set that you're looking at. So, Camille, what is driving change? Are you seeing more women in alternative investments?
Yeah, actually, what's helping the industry is the investors. The investors are a crucial part of helping to drive change. They're putting pressure on the investment teams. They're asking the questions. What are they doing about diversity at their organizations? We've seen about a 15% increase this past year in the report, based on the previous report, of people being concerned about the diversity. In addition, the investment teams are actually talking to their portfolio companies and requiring them to make change with their diversity efforts. So we really are seeing change starting with the investors.
All right, now let's talk about the male perspective in this year's report. Does it differ at all from women?
Yeah, what's really cool about it is this is the very first year that we've actually included men. We've always known, especially when you hear from some of the top leaders in the industry, that this is no longer, the business imperative has been made, and that the conversation needs to include men to talk about how we get women further in the industry. But this is the first time where we actually surveyed men. And the biggest conversation that came out as part of the survey was there's a huge gap between how far along the process men think we are versus women. Women, perceive that we still have a long way to go, and men believe that their organizations are doing everything that already needs to be done. So bridging the gap on how we find, it's great that there's men involved. Right. It's great that there's men who want this to be a topic of conversation, but we still have a ways to go as bridging the gap as to how far along the process we actually are.
So what are the steps that firms are taking to encourage women to enter the field of alternative investments?
Firms are actually doing a lot, and our report is actually showcasing all of those best practices that, say, firms are doing with respect to recruiting, retention, and advancement. There's a lot of examples in our report of what's working to help move the needle. For instance, when it comes to recruiting, these firms are actually looking at a complete diverse pool of candidates. When it comes to retention and advancement, we've noticed the data is showing that more women are on the investment committees at these organizations.
And I think the biggest area that we found at KPMG as part of the conversation is that sponsorship is the area that really needs to get to the next level. We found that only 20% of women who we spoke with actually have a formal sponsor that can continue to push them in their careers. And in order for us to continue to see more senior women involved, we've got to get that number up. So that's one of our areas of interest to see in future surveys and future conversations is how do we find more women, whether or not the sponsors are men or whether or not the sponsors are other women in the organizations, to continue to push them, into the next levels of their careers.
Do you expect this trajectory of including more women to continue on the path that it's on, or is there still a lot of work that needs to be done?
Well, this is a really big opportunity for the firms to really notice that the investors are asking the questions about diversity at their organizations. So they really should take a look at what they're actually, the makeup of their organization, because the investors are where the money comes from.
Right.
They're the ones that are actually infusing the money into the industry, and if they want to see change, the firms should really take a look at their own makeup. So this is a big opportunity to make a change in the industry.
So this is an example of ESG investing, where that's really driving decisions right now?
It is. It's a really interesting conversation. We know that ESG is a big conversation in Europe, right? And we actually look at gender as a component in Europe of ESG investing. In the United States, ESG hasn't officially included gender as one of their components, but I think it's a huge area where, because as Camille mentioned, investors are driving, they're the ones who are bringing the money in the door. And if the constituent of a pension plan wants to know that more women are involved in the industry, they're going to drive that conversation. And if the pension plan needs more ESG resources, one way for them to accomplish that could be through gender diversity.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us at MarketSite.
Thank you so much for
and
having
thank you
us.
for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.